All right, y'all. It's the second Friday of 2026. Wow. Welcome back. I'm Zuli, I'm your host, and I look forward to today's episode because I think it's a great way to evaluate our past year of 2025. So today's title is going to be 8 categories to reflect on your 2025, basically. We have faith, friendship, finances and work, family and environment, dating, fitness and health, career and school, and finally, personal fulfillment. Some of these may or may not apply to you, whether you do or don't have a job, or, whether you're in school or not. Either way, I just kind of want to talk about mine. And then, so that way you can kind of get a scope of how you can do that for yourself, because I genuinely feel like, because the first time I did this was in 2024, and it's so interesting to be able to look back on my notes from 2024 and then compare them now to 2025. But I will not be discussing my 2024 notes. I'm just going to be going over my 2025. But either way, the first one that I'm going to be discussing is faith. So I also categorize that as serving others as well, because I do feel that we are called to serve other people biblically. Biblically, oh my goodness. So I actually rated faith 5 out of 5, and that's for a myriad of reasons. And I remember in 2024, I guess I'll mention it here and there, it definitely did score like a couple points lower. So I rated out of 5. So this year, faith for me got faith 5 out of 5. And 5 out of 5 doesn't necessarily mean, oh, it was perfect. There was no mistakes. There was no doubt. It's 5 out of 5 for me is persevering despite all of that and doing as much as possible despite all of that. Um, so I, for the first time going into 2024 to 2025, I decided that I wanted to be intentional about just setting one goal for myself. That's all I wanted to do. And that goal ultimately for me was to finish reading the other half of the Bible that I still hadn't yet. And so I wanted to finish it by December, and I had kind of planned it all out. And the way it was going to go was that in order for me to finish by December, I had to read about like 2.5 books of the Bible every month. And then I tried to divide that, by every week and blah, blah, blah. And, most of the time I had to do by audio because I'm, pretty busy with school and work and all that. So that's kind of like why I decided to do that. And ultimately, I was able to finish it by June. And I was very, very surprised. At times, I felt like I walked away from God, you know what I mean? Even this year and this past year, I'm sorry. And I felt like I learned from those experiences that He's always there. And I also started going to a Bible study too. That was really interesting because I started going in May of last year. And I truly do feel like, even though in like the first 2 or 3 months, I wasn't able to go consistently because there was things going on. Um, I I have learned a lot from there, and I also went to the one like at church, and I also went to like an independent one. I also started volunteering for like even like the kids Sunday school Bible study as well. That truly I feel um, helped me become in more of a state of leadership and realizing that it's important to help uh, lead people in the right way. And I also started volunteering for like the kids ministry, like at the church that I go to. Even though I was really scared, I started in February, so I had actually wanted to start since like the end of like 2024, but I didn't get to start till like the beginning of 2025. So it just goes to show that, whenever it's time, and whenever um you take that leap of faith, ultimately that's kind of whenever things start to blossom. I also started to volunteer for like the Sunday school that I had mentioned, that was like in the summer, like in August. And I truly do feel that, I started uh, developing even more faith this year. I started, taking like communion as well. Like I did that a couple of times, and I was able to, buy a Bible for myself and my little sisters. And uh, I think that I really do feel called to like help them with their faith more, because I didn't necessarily have that growing up. And I do feel like if I did, I would have seen life a lot differently, than I did now. It could have spared me a lot of pain. And I also learned about the power of confession and not keeping sins hidden. I think that was the biggest thing, of course, and then also seeing God touch the lives of my loved ones. But I learned that, when we stay quiet, when we stay in isolation, ultimately that's what keeps us in our sin more than likely, because we just feel like, oh my goodness, we're just doing like this terrible thing and no one could ever truly like understand us. But whenever I finally admitted to certain things, I felt like I was able to break those chains. Um, because of that. So that's something that, only do it with someone that you trust, of course, but that is ultimately like what truly helped me. And friendships, I rated that a 3 out of 5. And that's because, not necessarily because of the relationships that I have with my friends, but I do feel like because of, me being busy and stuff like that, I wasn't able to prioritize them as much as I wish I could have. I had like a couple of slip ups where I felt like I could have had a better attitude and stuff like that. But I feel like I don't open up to them as much as I used to. And that's something that I am working on, not even necessarily with friendships, but in general, you know what I mean? And luckily, after years of her persevering, my best friend was able to graduate nursing school. And, we had a little photo shoot and stuff like that, but it felt like such a big win because, congratulating her on her hard work and how proud I was of her accomplishing her goals. And also another friend that we have that did the same thing. um, that just felt really amazing, And then I also did like something called an SNT, that's like for a National Honor Society that I'm in for the school that I go to. Um, I was able to pair it with a group of 4 other ladies, I believe. I was the youngest, but we had like a few Zoom meetings and we talked about like the goals that we had and whatnot. And I truly do feel like um that is something that I didn't know I needed. You know what I mean? Like every single one of us had something different. Like, someone, she wanted to graduate, another one, she wanted to, find a job in the school um, from what she did for school. You know what I mean? Another one, she wanted to travel. Um, Another one wanted to work on procrastination, and then another one wanted to work on health. You know what I mean? So it's just like every single one of us, we had something different going on, and just being able to speak into each other and help support one another throughout those few weeks truly did help. We even talk from time to time as well. We try to, at least. And um I think I was able also to like socialize more in general. Like I've noticed that um with like trying to not necessarily seek out more friendships, but being more open to them than I was before. I felt like I was very close-minded in the sense of, this is, I have my group and I don't have to really worry about letting anyone else in. But being vulnerable enough to say, you know what, I think it would be good for me, even if that's like at work, not necessarily in the sense of guarding myself as much as I used to. Of course, being careful in a sense, guarding my heart, but still being more open than I used to be. Um, and I've made friendship like at church and like at Bible study. I've opened up more about myself and everything, and that was really hard because I had never truly let anyone like know all of, truly deeply myself, and like ask for prayer and say, you know what, um I need support at this time. And I also was able to travel like with a friend to a state that I had always wanted to, and that was truly so surreal. I never thought that I would go. I mean, we literally just planned it like in 2 weeks. It was so amazing. It was so beautiful. Washington State, totally 10 out of 10 recommend. I had so much fun. The next category I'm going to be talking about is finances and work. So I rated that a 4 out of 5 because in the beginning of the year, although most of the year last year I didn't have like like steady work, a full-time job kind of thing. Um I felt like pressure from from another person to like figure out like what I was gonna do with my career and like with my finances and find a job and all that. And I truly felt like it wasn't my time, you know what I mean? Like I felt like I was being rushed. I felt like too fast. But after almost 9 months of like longing for a more stable job, more work, praying about it and stuff like that, being worried about it, within a month of this person leaving my life, um, well, I actually scored an interview, to work at like my old elementary school and stuff like that. But like, I left, you know, like a month later, unfortunately, because it just didn't work out with like certain things that were going on and stuff like that. I just felt like, my safety as an individual and my, just stuff like that, I felt like it wasn't respected. And I truly do feel like, a couple weeks before my final day, I think it was just like perfect timing. I had reached out to a company that I used to work for, like being a reading tutor, and they had shut down because of like finance things because they're a nonprofit and stuff like that. And someone had actually told me that they were up and running again. And so I reached out. Um, and I didn't get a response, but about like a week later or so, like that, my current boss, she reached out to me and she said, hey, like we do have an availability for the location that you're looking for. And so, I finished off the semester, and then, the week later I was training for this position, and now I'm here. And I get to work for the first time with the kids tomorrow, like formally, as far as like the new semester or whatever. I got to see them last month, and it was great. I got to meet them, and I look forward to this year to work with them, and hopefully see what job opportunities come as I get closer to graduating. And finally, well, not finally, but the next one I'm going to be discussing is like my family slash home environment. So I actually rated this a 3 out of 5. So kind of like the same thing like with friendships as well. I felt like, um, the relationships that I truly put in the effort into, they, how do I say, like, the relationships that I used to have that I didn't put effort in, those weighed, but the ones that I didn't and did put effort into, they blossomed. I don't know, does that make any sense? Like, I realized that I have to be intentional about dedicating time to people, um because ultimately that's kind of what, time is what creates that kind of, relationship. And I noticed that I'm kind of like this middle person in the family, if that makes any sense. Like, kind of like almost a peacemaker, I guess. And in my past, and there's a person that I had in my life that I felt like was whispering in my ear, and they were altering my perception of my reality. And it can be in a both negative or positive way, you know what I mean? I feel like I learned things, but I also catastrophize them too in a way that didn't necessarily serve me, you know what I mean? So I had to like let go of all that and take what I needed to learn. And I feel like I isolated myself because I allowed myself to like adopt to like this point of view. But ultimately I started to see things more clear once this person left. And I realized that I just have to be careful about who I bring around my family, because that's something that I didn't truly realize and recognize until um, the vulnerability that I felt ultimately. I'm sure my family could feel it too, but I just realize now how important it is to make sure that I'm careful about who I bring around my family, because they're so near and dear to me, you know what I mean? And I truly do think and feel that they deserve to have somebody, that I bring around that's gonna do well, you know what I mean? That's gonna do good for them and for the family and stuff like that. Of course, they won't be perfect, but regardless, I just look forward, to seeing how my relationship with my loved ones will flourish. And as God refines my character, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not gonna say that um, I never did anything or whatever, or I think it's more in my thoughts, but regardless, our thoughts can definitely affect our behaviors. All right, so the next category I'm going to be talking about is dating. So this is an interesting one. I actually rated it a little bit higher than I did in my 2024, because 2024, you know, 2024 was difficult, with my like health and stuff like that. So I definitely wasn't up to par for like dating, and then I had just got out of something, you know what I mean? So I didn't feel like it was my year for dating, in 2024, but 2025 was a little bit better, necessarily like much better, but um I felt like this pressure almost internally to like get to know someone, to talk to someone, because I was like, quote unquote, like the only like single one in, out of my age group in my family. And it's something that I've had to navigate through. I had to step away from social media more, definitely, because I noticed myself like comparing myself, and like it promoted me wanting to like go on dating apps and stuff like that. And that's how I ended up meeting, the person that I had mentioned very briefly. Um, I won't obviously give any names and stuff like that, but this person and I, we were together, and I'm not gonna say like but none of the things that contributed to the ending of that were mine or his. It just, I felt like I was just mirrored, in the sense of like my personality was copied, and then so I fell in love with someone that truly didn't exist. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like this person, it's so hard to explain. Like, I can definitely tell they were watching me, because they were able to pick up on like very tiny things, like my tone of voice or like my body language and stuff like that. And that's not something like a typical person does, you know what I mean? And so I definitely did go through a lot there, but I realized that at the end of the day that I was dealing with someone that had a lot of wounds themselves, but I'm just glad that God delivered me from that, and that now, starting my 2026, I'm in such a better headspace, because I realize now that before going into a relationship, how important it is to um be at peace with oneself, content with oneself, in the sense of like who one is. And as I had mentioned, from um, the previous episode, that relationships do not guarantee happiness, and they will definitely not fix you. If anything, they show all your flaws, and that's something that I definitely did experience. Finally, well, not, why do I keep saying finally? I don't mean finally. The next category is going to be fitness and health. So definitely this past year, 2025, fitness and health was so much better compared to 2024, because like I said, I was very physically ill and stuff like that in 2024. um but in 2025, I won't say that I created like exactly like an eating or like an exercise plan and like stuck with it, but like I definitely did walk a lot at work. And I like to walk outside, like at the park from time to time whenever I could, or like near my house, kind of a thing. But I think, as I had mentioned, the perfect body is definitely not going to solve all your problems, that I had mentioned in the last episode. But I was like battling, especially as a woman, like this thing of like strong versus skinny, like in my head. Like, that's something that I've had to invite into and help God into, and help me kind of distinguish that. because I didn't have like an actual like gym membership like the entire year of like 2025. So of course it made it a lot difficult to um pursue like those health goals and stuff like that. And however, though, at the end of 2025, I thought about that. I was like, huh, like that's like a big goal of mine, is like to prioritize my physical health. You know what I mean? But and then I realized, like, how was that going to be possible if I don't put myself in an environment to like make that happen? So I actually signed up for a gym membership at the end of 2025, and I went that very same day after I finished like writing all this reflection and stuff like that. Um, and I'm really glad that I did it. It's not easy, of course. I think like the first month is the hardest. I'm like halfway in that point, and I think this is around the time where things start to get a little difficult, like those like those thought processes of like trying to I guess self-sabotage, I guess is the word I'm trying to say, um try to come in and stuff like that. But ultimately I think that it's helped a lot just persevering and trying to remember like what I'm doing it for. I'm doing it for my health, not to look a certain way, even though, of course, obviously that it does help, physically. But I think the main thing for me that I've noticed the biggest change is in my mental health, for sure. um the next category is career slash school. So I rated that a 4 out of 5, actually. Um, thank God in 2025, I feel like I did pretty well in my classes and it's helping me grow in my career. So I can't complain about that. Now I'm about like 11 months away from graduating, and I'm very, very, very excited about that. I have like a couple of English classes and like 5 psychology classes left to go, because I'm an English major and, a psych minor. My job has aligned with my career very well, and I feel like I'm glad that I had the courage to walk out and walk away from a job that was no longer serving me, and it wasn't developing my career. I think this year in 2026, there's going to be a lot sort of career and school and work taking up a lot of my time. But I'm glad that at least I have, like my physical health is something that I have to be very mindful of, and that kind of like coincides with like both of these categories, to like make sure that they're both prioritized, because ultimately um there has to be a balance as much as possible, you know what I mean? And to make sure that there's the possibility of not overexhaustion, and also prioritizing, myself and my health while accomplishing these goals. And finally, now I can actually say finally, the very last core category that I have is personal fulfillment. And I actually rated that a 4 out of 5, despite it being kind of a tough year. I think most of that comes from feeling like I've grown a lot internally, even if others may not see it, but I definitely do feel it, like in my thoughts and like the way I think and stuff like that. Because I always wanted to have a conversation, like for instance, this is an example. um I had always wanted to have a conversation with a stranger about, you know, God, because I had been curious about whether someone could tell or not that like I'm a follower of Jesus. And I recently had like 2 interactions, and it genuinely came out of nowhere, and it felt like so affirming. Like I remember like one was when I was like at the dentist office, and then this gentleman, this older gentleman, had kind of said like, oh yeah, like I was saved when I was 15. I was like, oh really? I was 20. And then he's like, oh, you're a Christian girl. So and then we started talking, and he said that he felt it from me, like he felt something, and that like truly felt like amazing, because since he's older, I'm sure he's been walking in the faith for a long time, so he's able to like kind of discern that a little bit more, and it felt really good. And then also like here on my job too, she was like an outside person or whatever, but we kind of like talked about um I don't even know like how this happened or how I started like opening up to her and stuff like that, but like I completely forgot about this conversation. But basically she kind of like I told her about, kind of like what I had mentioned with like dating and stuff like that. And she had kind of said like, don't beat yourself up if like it doesn't work out with like a certain person, or like don't put too much pressure on yourself. Like time will tell, because like, and don't get mad at yourself like if you get it wrong. And I think that was something that I genuinely needed to hear. Um, I feel like God has genuinely, like spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and even physically, like taken me on a journey this year that I never thought would have been possible, especially for myself. I feel like He's really heard like my silent prayers in which I couldn't say anything, but like He heard my heart. And when I was at my weakest, He was at His strongest, and that's what truly fueled me was His love. And I felt like the veil that was covering my eyes, like of me not seeing things clearly, I felt like He took that off, and now I see and hear and feel more than I have ever in my life. And my spiritual sensitivity has just like increased in general, and my discernment, and God has helped me use those gifts to help unravel parts of myself and help guide those around me that also need that as well. And I've helped give people advice as far as like faith and stuff um this past year, and I think that's leaking into this year. But I've learned that my fulfillment isn't in myself, but ultimately it is in God, because I remember before I used to always worry about, and I, honestly, if I'm being vulnerable, I feel like there's something that's coming back, but I'm learning to like, I have to prioritize my time with God ultimately, because that's something that um has to be a priority, or else it will quickly wane. And I think that that's something that fulfillment in life, there's many different avenues that people go on, but I think that learning and surrendering my life to Him is ultimately what has truly made a difference. So again, this title of the podcast was 8 categories to rate and reflect on your 2025. The categories, you can rate them between 1 and 5. And faith, friendship, finances and work, family and environment, dating, fitness and health, career and school, and finally personal fulfillment were those 8 categories. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your 2026. Feel free to drop any sort of need any advice, or even reflect on your 2025, and if you feel compelled to or comfortable in writing that in the description below, that'd be great. I'd love to have that conversation back and forth. But if you don't, that's totally fine too. Definitely take the time, if you can, at least dedicate about 30 minutes to do this exercise. Some people will write more than others. I definitely did write a lot more this year than I did the year before. It was a lot harder because 2024, that was my first year doing it, but it does get progressively easier over time. You will definitely thank yourself for it later. Other than that, I look forward to the next one, and thank you so much for tuning in. Have a blessed weekend, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.